Hello, everybody. Eliman Dambell here of Tradeview Markets, and welcome to this session in which we are going to be looking at which markets to look for as far as movement in the next few days. Now, as it pertains to these sessions, every time that we do them, we do need to understand that there is a risk element to financial trading, and these sessions aren't here to give you advice or any direction as it pertains to how the markets could move. It's more of a general overview of what is currently taking place fundamentally, and of course highlighting those technicalities and seeing where the potential opportunities could be in the next few days. Now, in saying that, what I am going to do is move on to the MT4 platform. Before we move on to the MT4 platform, it's just to give you an overview on the various platforms in which we offer here at Tradeview. Of course, you do have the MT4, the MT5, C Trader, and a few other platforms in which you will be able to use. Now, with these sessions, we are going to be using the MT4, so bringing up the MT4, and as it pertains to this week, there has been a lot happening, but let's start off with gold. Let's start off with gold. A lot of you would have seen the situation there as it pertains to this metal there on Friday. Between Thursday and Friday, essentially, we saw a $30 drop in the price of gold. Now, a lot of people have been asking the question, can this continue? Are there more moves on the downside to come? Could this potentially find its floor and start to change direction? And we just don't know. So far, we just don't know. But let's try and find out, looking at some of these technical analysis points, just to see if there are further opportunities in the pipeline. Now, as you can see, we are currently looking at this from a daily time frame perspective. Yes, you do see when the initial fall took place, and that was the huge candlestick, of course, which everyone say taken by surprise. It came on the day where the US and of course China came to somewhat of an agreement to potentially roll back tariffs in time. So of course a lot of investors were overjoyed at the news and started to, of course, take their money out of the metal safe haven, which is gold, and move it to the likes of the S&P, to the likes of the Dow Jones and other traditional equity markets. Now, seeing that I don't call it a historical low, but we do see the previous time that the markets hit this particular level, it was somewhat of a false breakout at there around 1,453, then turning back towards the 1510 area, which we can clearly see was also a resistance. And as far as that resistance, we can see that was the level around 1510, 1511, where we saw this recent sell-off really start to take place. It has, of course, passed that previous 1465 floor, and of course now we are around 1453 or so. And the question is, where is next? Since the markets have essentially broken out on what we could classify as damn near a 3-month resistance, where next? Could we see this continuing to try and find its bottom? Could the bottom even be 1413? Where could this price be heading to? Now, that's the question everyone wants to know. That's the question everyone wants to know. And I need to say, if I did know the answer to that question, I'd probably be remortgaging my house, trying to get as much capital in order to be involved in that trade. Because we don't know. We do not know. But again, it's a case of trying to make an educated decision as a trader, and the only way you can make these educated decisions is by doing the analysis, in which we will try to look at now. Looking at it from this perspective, you can see the last two, Monday and of course today, Tuesday, we do see somewhat of a slowing taking place around, of course, 1450s. You do see historically at that level there, it did act as somewhat of a resistance. So what was potentially an old resistance there, question mark, could it be a new support there? So old resistance, potential new support in this particular zone. If you're looking at the moving averages, now with the moving averages that I like to look at, I look at, of course, a 10-day red moving average, a 25-day in blue, and of course there in olive green you have the 50-day. The question is, yes, the downwards crossover, and for those of you who are familiar with moving averages, we know when you have that short-term 10 crossing over the downwards 25, we normally know what that signals. You saw what that signaled there. You saw what that signaled throughout history. Each time that we have those crossovers, it is usually a downwards market. So the downwards market, of course, is already taking place. But the question is, can that momentum continue downwards, or is it had its time to potentially settle down? Now, looking at the volumes, looking at the RSI, essentially, we know below 30 or close to 30, it's oversold. Above 70, it's overbought. At the moment, of course, clearly we are closer to 30. We are around 34. So a lot of people may ask themselves the question, or even tell themselves that this is oversold. In saying that and saying anything with financial trading, you do need to look at it with relativity. Now, looking at this with relativity, you can clearly see that breakout as well as it pertains to the volume. We've seen before this run, it had essentially remained within 40 and 52 for the most part of the last few months. If you zoom out, just take a better look, you can see where the markets have been. But again, in order to know where they're going, we do need to know where they have been in the very, very grand scheme of things. So zooming out, you can see the summer of 2018, a lot of instances where the volume went down to 22. So if you are looking at the fact that this breakout has been fairly recent, and it hasn't done so realistically, if I just bring this down, can say since around March and whatever else. So there's two questions. Firstly, is it going to remain where we are now? Remember earlier on we were saying, could the old resistance be a new floor? Looking at the RSI, you can see that had been a floor there previously when it came to the volumes in the market as far as selling and buying. The question is, if it does remain there, firstly, could you be looking at a potential turnaround? But if it continues to fall and go below 33, could you be seeing history repeat itself and the market's potentially falling down to around 22 when it comes to the volume? So those are interesting questions when you are looking at gold, whether it is going to go down towards the 1409s or potentially go back up into that range in which it had created over the past few months. So interesting questions, and it would be interesting to see how the answers do somewhat manifest over the next few days. Now, over the next few days, starting off with tomorrow, we do have the CPI numbers coming out of America. Of course, we know the US is heavily correlated with gold prices. So it would be interesting to see how not only the CPI numbers tomorrow, but also the address there from Powell has an impact rather on the price of gold. Of course, we know today as well, Donald Trump would be speaking within the Economic Club in New York City. So over the next few hours, I would say have a look at some of the shorter time frames just to see how those are moving as well. Are we looking at a potential change of direction? Of course, what we see on a daily may not be the same as what we see on a 4-hour time frame, may not be what we see on a 1-hour time frame. So have a look at the time frame, see how things are positioned, just to see if there are potential opportunities on different time frames. So that's the first one we want to look at. The next one we want to look at, of course, is the S&P. The next one we want to look at essentially is the S&P. Now, with the S&P, of course, pretty much every other day now is a record high. But what we have started to see since especially that run there, leading to the market getting into around 30.97, we have seen a lot of consolidation. If we switch time frames, you can see that consolidation, or potentially what could be seen as a resistance take shape a bit clearer. Now, the question essentially to ask, especially when you are trading record highs, is now, a lot of people, when you are looking at record highs, the first thing you would say is, when is it going to come down? Let's be honest. The first thing you would say, it's gone up before. Where is the drop? It's gone up before. When is the drop? Now you have seen it has gone up again, another record high. But the question mark is, potentially speaking, where is the drop? Now, that would be the rule of thumb a lot of people may be looking at. But in the same regard, of course, we know a lot of traders and more investors do believe in the US markets and believe the overall value here will continue to grow. But from a trading perspective, from an intraday perspective, it's a case of asking some of those difficult questions and seeing if the opportunities can absolutely be on the downside. Now, In saying that, if you are looking at the RSI, you do see, relatively speaking, it is overcooked, overbought. We have seen that the markets haven't necessarily penetrated that level of 73 for a very, very long time. You can zoom out and you can see pretty much December of 2017 was the last time that we saw the volumes past the levels there. It looks like a resistance. It started to come down. If you're looking at the moving averages, yes, the 10-day momentum is still going upwards. The 25-day moving average is still heading upwards, and so is the 50. But so it was the same when we saw those previous runs as far as the downwards moves. All three indicators were heading upwards until it found its ceiling, then decided it was time for that correction, for that drop down. The question potentially could be, for those who are looking at this, where could that drop eventually come? If it were to come, where could we see a potential drop? But for those of you who are more optimistic and more bullish, if you, let's say, switch to, let's say, a weekly time frame, you could potentially give yourself the eyes of saying the markets aren't close to being overbought. Yeah, relatively speaking, yes, but you do have instances where in the grand scheme of things, they could go up to damn near the 90s, the mid 90s and whatever else. So you're nowhere near those levels, and you could potentially even ask, could we be looking at runs towards those levels in the very, very grand scheme of things on a weekly time frame? But from a daily time frame, from an intraday perspective, we do need to ask those short-term questions. Even though in the long term it may go up, can we potentially be looking at downwards opportunities in the meantime? Now, one more before we head off for today, and we have to look at crude oil. We have to look at crude oil in the situation which is going on over in Saudi Arabia, especially with Saudi Aramco. Now, the run is for the last few months, to be honest, essentially since September, we have seen a lot of Saudi-led moves, huge moves when it came to crude oil. Of course, we saw the situation when we had the attacks in the oil plant leading to that 20, damn near 30% jump overnight in the price of oil. Then, of course, Donald Trump coming out and saying the US will absolutely make up for the shortage of supply. We saw the huge drop that took place thereafter. Since then, we have been looking essentially an equidistant channel, some consolidation taking place in and around these areas. So it has, in a sense, been consolidating, but more in an ascending fashion. Now we can see it has reached somewhat of a resistance. Clearly, this is a resistance. You can see the sell-offs that took place there historically. You can see the sell-offs throughout time. So the question is there enough momentum? Is there enough volume to potentially see this continue, potentially breaking out into those $58, $59 levels? Or are we going to see what has happened each and every single time it had hit this resistance happen again, and are we going to see a sell-off? So a lot of similar questions taking place, a lot of potential sell-offs. But guys, these could all be bull traps, or bear traps rather, as far as the markets painting a particular picture of what could happen, and we see the very opposite take place. So a lot of interesting storylines over the next few days. So definitely have a look at not only these, but have a look at different markets to see where some of these opportunities can potentially be created. And until a next session, I will have to leave you to it and bid you a farewell. So I've been Eliman Dambell. This has been Tradeview's MT4 platform, and we will see you soon. Take care. All the best. Bye-bye.